Welcome, everyone. Live from New York, this is Kamal Aluwalia, President of Eightfold, and your host for today's webinar. Today, we are joined by industry analyst and guru, Josh Bersin. He's going to share an exciting new initiative, Global Workforce Intelligence Project. We are absolutely privileged to partner with Josh to guide business and HR leaders through the workforce trends that none of us saw coming, but they are absolutely shaping companies, industries across the globe, as well as our individual careers. So after Josh covers the overview of the project, we'll move into a panel discussion with Kathy and Darius, also from Josh Bersin Company, Roger Cute from actually fantastic career in HR leadership, most recently from Humana, and right now enjoying 4 inches of snow in New Mexico. Stuart Logan from BNY Mellon, and Mark Starfield from Vodafone, joining us all the way from UK. And if any point in today's program you have questions for the speakers, please enter them in the Q&A box on the webinar console, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But otherwise, we'll follow up, because I think with the panel that you're seeing, we will run out of the hour very quickly. With that, I will turn it over to Josh. All yours, Josh.
Thank you, Kamal, and welcome, everybody. This is a absolutely spectacularly interesting time in our lives, in our careers, in our companies. And so let me take a couple of minutes and introduce you to the topic and the work we're doing, and then we'll listen to the highly esteemed group we have online, because we want to spend most of our time talking to them. The project that we've undertaken with support from Eightfold is really a big project. Kathy's really responsible for a lot of this work, to look at the skills, jobs, career pathways, and roles of the future and of today and of the past in specific vertical industries. And as many of you know, Eightfold is not just a software company. Eightfold is a data company. Eightfold has, I believe, the largest database of workforce profiles around the world, 1 billion plus people. And so working with Eightfold, we are looking at industry by industry, the roles, jobs, and skills of the future, and finding some very interesting things that Kathy will tell you just a tiny bit about, which will be available in a series of industry reports. And the big theme, of course, for most of you that you know this, is the job market. The job market is at an unprecedented level of activity. I have never seen this before. Roughly 1 in 9 jobs are open in the United States. Other countries are experiencing the same problem. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Even if we have a recession, the fertility rate is far below replacement in the US, UK, Germany, Japan, Nordic countries. All of the developed economies have decided people are postponing having children. They're having fewer children. 2.4 million people retired during the pandemic early, according to the BLS. So it's going to get harder and harder to hire. And what that means, and by the way, that means you're not going to want to lose people. And as you know, workers, employees are moving out of and between companies at also an unprecedented rate. It's roughly 4 to 4.5 million people are voluntarily leaving their jobs in the United States every month, starting November, December, and January. You multiply that by 12, that's almost 50 million people out of a workforce of about 160 million in the US. That's almost a third. So imagine if a third of the people in your company decided, they're going to leave. Now, I know in the healthcare industry, that's not unusual, but in a lot of other industries, it is. So we're in a very, very strange period of time, to say nothing of the role of wages and the need to change the employee value proposition, change the way we reward people, improve the employee experience. All of these things are, really colliding on HR people and HR teams at the same time. So when we started the GWI project, and we've been talking to Eightfold about this for really a number of years, the original thesis of this was, let's look at the skills and jobs and roles and careers of the future in a bunch of different companies. And we realized, actually, it's a much bigger problem than that. It isn't just identifying how many data scientists you need, or how many machine learning people you need in your software company, or how many salespeople you need. It's really an issue of industry by industry. Most industries are turning into something new. And we're going to talk about this with the folks on the line here. Healthcare companies are moving into new forms of clinical service delivery, data, and to some degree, pharmacies and other businesses. Banks and other financial services are moving into fintech and crypto and all sorts of different things there. Telecommunications companies are moving into media, and they're turning into media companies. Automobile companies are turning to an electric motor, and we were talking earlier, maybe they're going to get into video communications in their cars. I mean, I don't need to go through all these, but every industry we're talking to is going through this reinvention. And we used to call this a digital transformation only a decade ago, but it's much, much more than that. Digital is not just, digital is sort of the necessary, invention, but it's really more. It's learning how to be something that you weren't sure you really needed to be. And that's really what we're going to talk about with the panel. Now, just to give you just a teeny tiny sample of what we've been looking at with the Eightfold data, we've looked in 2 industries so far. We're looking at healthcare and financial services. We're going to talk to Roger and Stuart and Mark about this. In banking, for example, over the last 5 years and the coming 5 years, the front office jobs in banking are disappearing. The IT jobs or the technology jobs are exploding. And so the profile of the workers in a bank or, commercial bank or consumer bank are going to become very, very different, and they are competing for the same staff as many other companies. They are also competing with another bunch of companies, which we call Fintech companies, that are way ahead on that transformation. If you look at a bank on the left that has 15% of its staff in IT and tech, a Fintech company has 55%. And if you look at the job titles, job levels, skills, and capabilities of the people in that orange slice on the right, they are completely different from the skills and capability of the people in that orange slice on the left. So if you're in a bank and you're trying to become or compete with a fintech type of company, and by the way, JP Morgan Chase has written a whole big sort of treatise on this, you're going to have to think about the jobs, the roles, the careers, the skills in a very, very different way. And that's really what we're studying. And if you look at just that one industry, you can see that I could, pretty much predict that the banks that can move quickest into this new world of fintech-related technologies are going to be the ones that grow the fastest and stay the most competitive. And that's true in healthcare, telecommunications, and every other industry. So that's really what this is all about. And in healthcare, as I'll let Kathy talk about in a minute, it's even worse. The healthcare industry is largely dependent on nursing and nursing-related roles. And based on the research we've done with the Eightfold data so far, it looks like we're going to be short almost 2 million nurses over the next 3 to 5 years. Those people are not going to come out of nowhere. You're going to have to transform your company, transform your jobs, transform your organization in order to deal with that change. And so, that's what this is all about, is really understanding this. So let me move to the panel. I don't want to spend too much time on the topic. There's many, many dimensions to this. And so rather than, oops, sorry, Kamal, I was going to go to I guess we don't have a picture of the panelists anymore. Let me start by introducing them one at a time and have them talk a little bit about their company, their role in the company, and what are some of the biggest talent challenges that you're working on in your organization. Roger, would you like to go first and talk a little bit about HCA and your experience in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Thanks, Josh. Roger Cute, and I've been in the healthcare industry for 9 years. Prior to that was in major retailing and financial services before then. And I would say, the key priorities that we have, and I would say these are much broader in the healthcare industry, is that many healthcare companies were going towards digital transformation. prior to the pandemic. But the pandemic absolutely accelerated everything that we're doing. And that's just probably the case with many of the companies represented on this call in the audience and so forth. But particularly in healthcare, when you're a healthcare company in a healthcare crisis, it tends to make things accelerate quite rapidly. In addition to that, Josh, healthcare companies, we were focused on integrated health and well-being, which is really taking the whole industry and looking horizontally in not just acute care, palliative care, other kinds of things, and then insurance companies. It is really looking at that integrated, seamless experience and the way interoperability and the way that the whole healthcare experience is delivered. There's a lot of opportunities there for efficiencies and effectiveness, as everyone can probably guess, even in the U.S. and much more broadly around the world. But there's also a lot of parts of the customer experience that need to be improved there. And then third and final one I'll just say is the changing demands of the customer. Again, felt that during the pandemic, but even before that, the patient, the customer, the member, if you're talking about it from an insurance standpoint, their demands are just constantly evolving. And so care is starting to get delivered at where it's best delivered, not just in a clinic or not just in a hospital. You see a big push towards the home, a big push on telemedicine and telehealth. And all of that requires a much different workforce and much different skill sets for healthcare companies, particularly integrated healthcare companies.
Great. Roger, thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Kathy, let me have you expand a little bit on this. You've been doing a lot of in-depth looking at the healthcare industry and the future transformations needed. Can you give us your perspective a little bit broader on what you see going on in that industry, and then we'll move over to Stuart and Mark?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Josh. And Roger, I'd echo all of that, what you just said. We heard a lot of these same themes as we talked with, I think, 15 CHROs of very large healthcare systems here in the U.S. The clinical shortage, the shortage of nurses, physicians, and nurse-related positions is what we hear and what we see in the data, the biggest issue that all of the healthcare systems experience, because Josh just showed you the 2 million gap that we might have in the next 3 years. Well, you can't fill that by just hiring more nurses because they're just not out there. There's only 160,000 that graduate every year, and 50% of them leave the profession altogether in the first 2 years. So there's all these nurses out there that actually don't work in nursing. And why don't they work in nursing anymore? It's probably because the job was not what they thought it would be, because we hear that only 30% of a nurse's time is actually spent practicing at what we call top of license. So they are doing nurse stuff that they are uniquely qualified for only 30% of the time. So how can you design work in a different way so that nurses can practice most of their time top of license, and other people or automation gets the other 70% of the chunk? So it could be patient care physicians, practitioners, for example, or technicians or helpers, or machines that could take some of the lower skilled areas and lower level things that nurses have to do, so you get more work out of the nurses. And then, of course, in healthcare, I could go on and on. There's a lot of regulations, of course, that require you to staff up to certain levels. So there's lots of complexity in the healthcare system that we are all unpacking, in addition to just getting some interesting data on new skills, new capabilities of digital, telehealth, home health, all of those kind of things.
Thank you, Kathy. This idea of working at the top of your profession, which is a phrase that comes out of healthcare, actually applies to everything. What you find, and we'll talk about this in the other industries in a minute, is in a lot of companies, what happens as the company transforms is you're doing less and less of the work that you came to the company to do, and you're doing stuff that maybe you shouldn't be doing, and that's part of really building the organizational capabilities, not just training and educating and skilling people. Stuart, let me introduce you and have you talk about sort of what's your role at BNY Mellon, because you've really been, in some ways pioneering this, and what are some of the big talent challenges that you see going on in your company or in the financial services industry in general?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. So I head up operations and technology HR here at BNY Mellon. So we have about 53,000 employees. About 33,000 of them work in technology and our operations functions. BNY Mellon is sort of a trust bank. It's sort of a bank of banks. We sit in the middle between different financial institutions and make sure that we digitize and document those transactions, and hence we're sort of right in the center of the trusted advisor of moving money, around the world, and we've got relationships with obviously governments for where money gets into the market, and obviously very key in supporting the financial markets in that kind of way. But in many ways, you can imagine that we're sort of a back office for financial services. We digitize and document the movement of money, and with that comes the complexities given the scale of trillions and trillions of dollars of movement of assets and financial assets and money. How do we sort of deliver that high quality service, real time, on demand, etc. So we're becoming more and more of a technology organization as we progress down this sort of transformation of the financial services industry. So originally I came in to sort of support our agile transformation. How do we automate and build skill paths for our engineers to sort of pick up new skills, be on the cutting edge, worked with a number of different platforms on identifying what skills we wanted in those individuals and how we would develop them, worked with a number of partners around that. And then obviously a year and a half ago, we brought operations and technology together with the strategy around that if operations is the operational delivery aspect and technology is enabler, if you bring the organizations together, you get sort of the best sort of return on that investment. You're able to see how the operation is working and then digitize it much quicker. So obviously one of the biggest challenges I'm trying to overcome, with a talented group of HR and business leaders is how do we automate skills development, growth, both for now and in the future in the operations functions? Because a Java developer for us is a Java developer for Vodafone, et cetera, et cetera. But a financial analyst can be very different for different organizations. So you have to go deeper than the job description and the job title. You have to get to skills and competencies, and then you have to sort of rebuild the organization from that knowledge. And if you think of, your old organization, Deloitte, they know what their talent looks like because they sell their talent as part of their revenue generation. But there's 80% of companies out there that don't do that. So often their sort of digital fingerprint of skills and capabilities is a little lighter. So one of the challenges that we're trying to overcome is how do we speed up our ability to get that digital fingerprint of the skills and competencies of those individuals, and how do we shape those roles that are going to be the roles of the future, and how do we start to consolidate the roles that may be becoming less prevalent in our organization?
Great. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about how you're doing that, because I think you're really doing some fascinating things there. Mark, you're in what I consider to be the most disruptive technology industry of all. I don't know if most people realize that the telecommunications industry is probably the first tech industry that ever was created. Tell us a little bit about what's going on at Vodafone and what you see as the big critical talent issues in the next year or two.
Yeah, sure, Josh. I mean, it's interesting you say about technology and how that's changed. I mean, hear a little bit about Vodafone. I mean, we're the largest mobile and fixed operator in Europe and the largest 5G network. But more interesting is we're focusing, and we're the largest Internet of Things connectivity provider. So really focusing on how do we connect things. So there's hundreds and millions of these devices, from cars to lampposts. And we have to really transform our environment to keep up with that. So we've got about 96,000 employees in 26 main markets. In terms of some of the challenges we're facing, correlated to your industry reinvention point, so we need to transform and want to transform into a tech comms company. Now that means transforming into a new generation connectivity and digital service provider. So it's not about just enabling connectivity, but actually providing new services and products to ensure we have a sustainable growth environment. What that translates to into specific challenges we have at a skill level is we need to attract, develop these critical digital and technical skills. Some of them are known now, but some are still developing. A really practical example is we need to add 7,000 software engineers to our technology environment. Now, we hope and believe a lot of that will be how we reskill people. But the challenge we face is that many other organizations are also recruiting and looking for these very specific skills. We need to kind of reinvent ourselves in terms of having a highly skilled workforce with different skills, with a high-performing learning culture, where learning is part of our DNA. Skill-wise, in terms of the leadership level, is developing the organizational capabilities and leadership skills to drive these new growth engines, drive these new environments. And then a big challenge for us is kind of how do we make sure that we're an equitable and representative mix of people in those organizations. So that's the kind of key things that we're facing with. But really, we want the need to change and attract those new skills. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so telecommunications moving into internet-enabled services. By the way, while you were talking, I was remembering the TCS, or the company that used to provide cable service to me was called, forgot the name of it. It's now Comcast. They were basically cable guys. Now it's a big digital company. There's obviously the transformation that Stuart's going through, the healthcare stuff that Kathy talked about. So the next set of questions I'd like to talk about is how. So let me take a minute and just show you guys this slide. The issue that I think a lot of companies are dealing with, let's see if I can present this. If I click on a slide, will it show up? No. Okay, I'll go ahead here. The reason we're working with Eightfold, all of the companies on this call, is because of this problem that in whatever the transformation is that your industry or company is going through, you have a whole constellations of things happening at once. New skills are required, like Java or AI or a technology skill, new business capabilities around those skills, which have to do with, maybe nurse practitioner roles that require nursing skills in a different way, new roles that are created, and maybe new jobs. And all of these things are taking place in a sense at the same time. One of the things that Kathy and my research has found is that just recruiting the same skill over and over again in this labor market doesn't work, because you're competing with very, very sophisticated companies that are also recruiting those people, and B, you may need to find somebody who's much more diverse than you thought to do that job, both from a diversity standpoint and a standpoint of actually finding somebody to do it. So what I'd like to do now is go back to the panel and talk about the hows. How do you, build a skills strategy? What is the sort of fundamental organization structure and technology stack that you happen to be using, and where are you applying this? So, Roger, let me go back to you first and talk a little bit about, from your experience at HCA, how do you manage the skills transitions taking place as you go through to home health care, new nursing roles, new technologies and automation in the patient experience, and so forth?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And so it's interesting, and Kathy was mentioning this in the research that she's been doing as well, is that the skill shortage, or the nursing shortage, is going to represent quite a challenge for healthcare, particularly integrated healthcare companies. And you could think of care delivery systems, but you can also think of the home health and so forth. But we have a number of nurses that work out of their home and do telephonic interactions and care delivery with our members and patients. So when you think about, the way that we are thinking about the nurse shortage, how do we handle that? Where are the different kinds of opportunities that we can provide nurses, for example? And then what are the skills on top of their license that you need for those? Because it's very different for a nurse to be working in a home health environment versus a telephonic environment versus a hospital. And so just thinking about that really required us to be on this journey for probably 4 years now, in terms of the skills that are required for those different roles. And I think you mentioned it on the slide that you just had, is what are the capabilities that we need across all of those segments of the nursing workforce? And then what are the skills that are required for that in addition to their license? And so that's the journey that we've been on just with that.
This is just out of curiosity, as you were moving to more home delivery, how did you determine what these new skills are?
Yeah, we looked at a couple of ways. We looked at best performers and what skills they had, and then we looked at what are the skills that were actually required by the role, and so forth. And so just even managing time and the kinds of things that you would do in a panel of 30 patients as a home health nurse was very different than what you would do with a telephonic nurse. Both have a nursing degree, but very different requirements of the role.
Yeah, so let me just reinforce something that's important as part of Roger's comment. You know, there's this belief among, you know, a lot of the HR organization that if we buy a product like Eightfold and we turn it on, we're going to know all these skills we need to know. I mean, that's to some degree true, but you're going to have to do what HCA did. You're going to have to study the new roles and understand them, and to use that data to come back and create the talent practices you need to scale that up. Now, Kathy, you and I, talk a little bit about this idea of career pathways, if you would.
Yeah.
And what is a career pathway? And then I think give the example of what Amazon is doing, because it has relationship to nursing and healthcare, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. So that when we think about how to develop people for these roles, you can think about skill building or hiring or something like that. But one of the most creative concepts that we discovered was the concept of a career pathway. And the career pathway is not a career path. So think about a career path is maybe you enter the workforce as a nurse, and then you're going to be a nurse manager, and then you're going to be a chief nursing officer. You kind of develop in your function, or you're a financial analyst. You get to be a director of finance, a finance VP, and then the CFO at some time. So that's a career path. But what companies are doing is creating these career pathways from one kind of job, and it's usually a lower paying, lower level job that might be automated at some point, into another job, in another profession altogether, and that includes things like education. Could include a nursing degree, for example, could include rotations and experiences and online learning. So everything that you need basically to move from one job into another kind of job role altogether. So what Amazon has been doing for 10 years is actually they've been studying which of their jobs are going to go away. So their warehouse workers, I think no surprise to anybody, most of these jobs will be at some point automated, replaced by robots or something like that. They're very low level, lower paid jobs that don't have a lot of future. And so what they have been doing is encouraging the people in these jobs for 10 years actually to take one of 5 different career pathways. And one of those career pathways, of course, some of those career pathways go into jobs that are in Amazon. So it could be an AWS kind of person or software developer, something like that. But the most interesting career pathway that Amazon has been doing, I think, is developing people into jobs they don't have even at Amazon. So somebody could actually, Amazon will pay for their education and have this career pathways of the warehouse worker into a nurse job. And of course, they don't have any nurses, but they partner with large healthcare systems. We talked with one of them, which was fascinating, that give these career pathways of people that Amazon develops. They pay for their education for somebody who had been a warehouse worker into moving into a nurse role in this large healthcare system on the West Coast. So once somebody graduates with a nursing degree that Amazon paid for, they get placed into this healthcare system automatically. So it's just like breaking the company.
It's such an interesting, and you know, and thank you, Kathy, for sharing that. It's such an interesting example, because if you ask the Amazon people, why are you doing this? They said, well, it's only about $12,000 or $14,000 a year of investment. And these people are customers of ours, and we want them to go into their new career buying more Amazon stuff where they went.
Exactly.
So that gets back to that chart where I was showing this industry reinvention. You may think you're in this one industry, but actually you're not. You know, your company is touching these adjacent industries, so these career pathways can be much more flexible than you think. Thank you, Kathy. So, Stuart, you have done some amazing work at identifying the capability networks in your company, and looking at the skills by role and looking at job titles using Eightfold and other tools. I'd love you to just talk about your project and what you've been doing and share a little bit about your process, because I think it's really an example of where most companies need to go.
Sure. So you sort of have to go back sort of 3 years. And when I first joined, I was sort of really predominantly looking after the technology transformation by itself. So, it's the same challenge, but for technologists, as I mentioned before, Java is the same in all companies. Python's the same in all companies. So ultimately, it's a little easier. And it's probably better to explain a little bit the tool chain and what we were able to do. But we sort of worked with an organization that probably people are aware of called Pluralsight, very good skills training linkage organization. They've got a great sort of testing, I'll test you, and if you're in the middle of the level, I'll teach you from middle to expert. If you're a beginner, I'll teach you from beginning to intermediate. So sort of it became sort of the start of our journey. But what we realized is our job library was out of date. So we ironically had a legacy PeopleSoft system that we've just recently upgraded to Oracle HCM Cloud. But you have to think about the sort of history, which is how is data stored? Most of our storage of data historically has been in a relational database. And more in the last 10 years or so, we've moved to more of a graph database. And why is that important? Because if every piece of data has a timestamp to it, you can start to see the journeys that people go on, and you're able to see the movement and the changes that are happening over time. So with that, we did this project. We reimagined these jobs. We argued, should we have a Java developer and a Microsoft developer? Should it be one developer? Should we have back end, front end, full stack? All these kind of debates and discussions. And it took about a year and so to do the work. And to be honest, my team was exhausted after it. And then all of a sudden we merged operations together, and it was like, oh God, we really need to do this project again, but we got to do it better than we were able to do it at that point. Plus also we have to take that nuance of not knowing, like a financial analyst is different than accounting services. In every single organization, it's made up of different component pieces. So what we were able to do is we were able to partner with Eightfold to do some AI machine learning work of actually consuming available data within our organization. So we sort of consumed our learning history, we assumed our HCM data of movement of our people over time. We have resumes on file, so we're able to machine learn that. And Eightfold was able to marry that up against the external available data that they had and give us back what I call the 80-20 skills against that job. And it became a great starting point. So if you imagine what we did in technology, which was sort of blank piece of paper, how would we build these jobs and match them forward? What we were able to do with Eightfold is effectively get to sort of 80% roughly right information. But then we had to build this governance structure. So these sort of communities of practice, these groups of individuals that are accountable for certain job clusters and certain skills. And we needed to bring them together to help us with that 80-20 to make it 100% zero. So we wanted to decommission the 20% that wasn't quite right because of the knowledge of those SMEs, and then put in the skills that might be missing. And that's sort of given us sort of a great sort of foundation that then we can link to our LXP from a learning perspective that we're going to sort of build and create connection. I don't want to give the impression we're there yet, but it sort of gives you that vision and roadmap. It allows us to link to our talent initiatives like Talent Marketplace that we're in the process of building, mentor matching and things in that space. And then obviously, utilize some of Eightfold's capabilities on automatically recommending internal mobility. Because if you know where that individual aspires to go, you're able to offer up that job opportunity in a more proactive way. So everything circles back to this sort of skills job taxonomy that has to be modernized. It has to be, not one and done, but it has to have governance structure that keeps these jobs alive over time. Just an anecdote, the technology work that we did 2 years ago, we made the decision not to have a Scrum Master because we felt like it was a designation for an existing Scrum team. 2 years later, we're actually doing a much more broader transformation that requires certified Scrum Masters. So we now build that role in. So you can't sort of do it one time and then fix it 5 years later. We have to lead to a more frequent refresh of job skills, roles, and the evolution of the skills that make up the jobs have to be kept much more fresh. And by doing that, we're able to potentially really do some cool stuff off the back of that work. So that's where we are at the moment. We're not all the way there yet. We're doing a lot of the foundational work, but we see a path forward for that future.
Thank you, Stuart. You know, I really do think what you're doing is a model for virtually every big company. Let me take a minute, and then I'll turn it over to Mark for a sec, because he's doing something even more interesting in other ways. I think, you know, what I would like to sort of reflect on for you guys on the line is this isn't a problem of reskilling. It's much more complex than that. It's looking at the jobs, the roles, allowing people to operate at the top of their profession, and building a muscle to do this on a constant, ongoing basis. I think there was this idea in a lot of companies that let's do a new job architecture, a big skills project, and then we're done. And then we'll look at this again in another 10 years. No. This is an ongoing muscle. You need a technology like Eightfold to do this. I think a graph database is another incredibly interesting technology we can talk about. And I think Mark can probably talk about that too. And that's really what this skills, job, and organizational transformation is all about. It isn't just sort of looking at a bunch of job titles and figuring out what skills they are. So Mark, your situation is even more interesting because I think you're doing some of this yourself. So tell us a little bit about how you're putting together this all these systems together at Vodafone and how you see the pieces working.
Yeah, sure. So we've got a we call it Future Ready HR transformation program, and at the heart of that is kind of using AI and skills in a way which really supports. So some of the key themes you want to get out is like people really feel they can grow with the organization. Some of the language I like is we want to democratize opportunities. That means development, jobs, specific initiatives. And how we're doing that is, so we've implemented a cloud-based kind of core solution. We then partnered with Eightfold in terms of using Eightfold skills kind of environment. And to Stuart's point, you need something that keeps that refreshed and sustained. But we've added specific Vodafone skills to that. And people, when they go in, can now see the global skills, but also the ones that are specific to Vodafone that we believe we need to drive. And then what we've also then integrated that into a new learning experience platform. And we've developed some technology in the middle that kind of allows us to understand what people have looked at. So to Kathy's point around these career pathways, we use that plus jobs people are interested in to then develop these personal and purposeful learning recommendations. So new learning experience, when you go in there, we're linking you specifically to those things that you've had a look at, but also what we want to publish. We're using that then to create different and new talent pools, if you like, and people that have tangent skills or people that might want to develop in a different area. And we're then using the model to continue to learn. So what is it that people are exploring? How is that resulting in some changes? States, and we're putting it into a strategic workforce planning implementation. We're not finished yet. We'll go live in the middle of the year. But we want to move away from strategic workforce planning that is kind of headcount-based to skill-based. So we want to be able to take the skills that we're going to develop using Eightfold and all the other things that we learn from our employees, and then use that to say what type of skills do we need in which markets and where could we potentially get them, and then partner with other companies to say where are those skills potentially available. Is in terms of, if I link to Stuart, is we've got about 1.4 million active candidates who've given us permission to put their data into our Eightfold environment. We've got seeing a large proportion of people internally go and have a look and are registering and creating their own version of that profile. And that's going to give us a really powerful way to go and say, what skills do we have now? What are tangent ones and how can we develop them? And then we use that to do personal and purposeful campaigns, either to people that might not work for us. So not a generic, hey, there's a job at Vodafone, a specific one to that individual saying, you applied for this job before, this is a different one. And internally also allow people to really explore that and how to democratize opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a couple of really important points I want to just point out there. First of all, this idea that this is really a workforce planning opportunity in addition to a hiring skills and growth opportunity, that you will get a sense, and let me just show you this picture. If you do what Mark and Stuart and Roger were talking about, and you build this talent intelligence capability, all of these things are going to be possible. You're going to be able to look at all of these things. I'm just giving you a few examples of here, and where your company is going into the future. Interestingly enough, when Kathy and I were looking at the healthcare industry, the way we figured out what was going to happen in nursing is we went back in time. We went through the Eightfold database for the last 5 years and looked at what had changed, and we figured that if that trend continues, this is what it's going to look like. You could do that in your own company pretty easily if you had this data. The other point that Mark was making is this idea of the silver medal candidate, and that, you know, one of the things that will come out of this kind of a research project or this kind of initiative is you might find out that all these people that are impossible to hire have already applied to your company and you just passed over them and they're still there. So there's all sorts of things that happen by doing this that are not intuitively obvious to make your company scale. Let me go through a couple of questions that came in from the audience, because some of these are really, really interesting. So the first one I want to ask you guys is, somebody asked, how do you address the concern in HR about you know, people feeling that if they reskill themselves, they should definitely get a promotion for achieving those skills versus, you know, getting a raise, and skills not being something that are used for development, but are being used for promotion. And maybe, I think I'm kind of implying from his question that, you know, developing skills could be a liability for the company because it might cause a need to pay people more. What has your guys' experience been in, you know, sort of the culture of developing skills and people's expectations when they move into a higher skilled role? And I'll let whoever wants to answer.
I'm happy to give it a go.
Sure.
So obviously, professional services organizations who typically bill their talent out for revenue needs to know that their individuals are at the right level to be billed out at that level. So, you know, junior engineer, intermediate engineer, senior engineer, lead engineer, principal engineer, they're all pretty standard titles. And most organizations that are professional services have a very strict and documented set of skills attached to that basically builds a competency-based model. So these have been around for many, many years. It's just that 80% of organizations that don't use humans as a revenue generation, mechanism specifically by charging them out, have never had the need to be able to prove it to clients why someone's one level or another. But I also think the reason why people are thinking that way is because of our sort of older practices of job families and grades. Imagine you remove job families and grades and you actually paid based on skills. Now, those skills go up, those skills go down in value.
Are you ready to do that? Are you going to start doing that?
No, not in the short term. Not in the short term. I don't want to give that impression. My boss would shoot me in that kind of way. But I'm just trying to be provocative to make people realize that the whole concept of compensation is built off how we've built sort of job libraries, grade structures for some time. And actually, it's quite rudimentary in that it's almost like a ratchet. We ratchet people up because they are able to leverage in different ways. But sometimes people's skills and capabilities go down over time. They become outdated. And you talked a bit about that in banking, that like Microsoft Office skills are very predominant, but in fintechs, they're not. So I would imagine if we took a sort of average wage of fintech versus a traditional bank, there'll be a big difference. But there lies the opportunity to create those career pathways that Kathy was mentioning earlier, that effectively allows people to take in their own control a learning agenda to move themselves into areas of more value. And look, if a Java developer makes $200,000 and someone's able to learn the skills strong enough to go do that, and they make 120 grand, I don't really care. If they're worth 200 grand, we should pay them 200 grand. And I think,
one of the things that several companies have told us is this happens faster than you realize. You hire this $250,000 software engineer, and he or she is sitting next to somebody else who's making half that, and they find out about it, and all of a sudden you've got a pay equity issue. So this problem isn't something you can't ignore. Kathy, why don't you talk a little bit about a couple of the examples of this, because we've got a couple of interesting stories.
Yeah, so one interesting story we have from a healthcare organization, Bon Secours Mercy, who have career pathways, internal career pathways. So, for example, maybe their receptionists have this career pathway to be a nurse at some time, right? So they move them from, or like the environmental services worker or something, they get to be a nurse, and they say it's like the deli counter. So once you're a nurse, you have your ticket basically, and once you're up in line and behind all these other people that have maybe graduated as a nurse, you get the nurse job automatically. So you get automatic placement. They don't even have people interview internally. They say it's just like the daily counter. You pull your ticket, and once your time is there, basically you get placed into that job, because they have so many openings, and they say we don't need our internal people interviewing. Like our recruiting people focus on interviewing internal people that have our education and our like pre-qualified program already in place. We just place them. So that's one way to do that. Like set that expectation. People know that, right? So they say I just have to wait until it's my turn, but I don't have to interview 15 times after I've graduated from this new career pathways. The other example I'd make on the compensation, there's a company called DCP Midstream. They're kind of an oil
pipeline.
Pipeline company. Exactly. So they have a lot of frontline employees that repair these pipelines or the machinery there, and they actually pay people like an hourly rate more when they upskill themselves. So if they can repair more of these machines, even if they don't use it, even if they don't get a new job, they get like an hour, $1.75 more or something per hour for their hourly rate, because they have now broader skills. And if a machine breaks down, for example, that they don't have to ship somebody from another location and wait like half a day for that person to come over, because they have people that are kind of cross-trained and more generally available. So they pay them more even if they don't get a different job. So they literally pay them for skilling. So those
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Okay, listen, you guys, we've got about 10 minutes left and we need to do a wrap up, but I want to go back around and I want to ask you each one more question. So we've talked about, the need to understand your skills, to sort of focus on the future of where your business is going, create new career pathways, bring outside data and inside data together, work as a team to define the new roles and the new jobs inside of your company, and that this is going to become a muscle going forward. What have you learned in your projects that you think companies should be aware of that was a surprise? Is there something that you would say turned out to be the biggest challenge, the biggest surprise, or something that you would like to have not done that you would like to do differently? Roger, from your standpoint, you've been in this industry a long time.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. I got too many learnings. Have taken an hour to unload those. But here's the thing. A couple things that we did early on is, one is to try not to do it enterprise-wide to begin with. Start somewhere small, and usually it's skills that really cut across multiple segments or business units or functions within your organization. And analytics is always a good one, because just about every organization needs some level of analytics skills and or some types of technology skills, but that can be more narrow. But pick an area and give it a shot. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot about that. But I'll tell you, the other thing that we learned, and I'll be very quick on this, is that don't try to invent the skills taxonomy or whatever you want to call it yourself. There are so many available. And Josh, I think on your slide you had some listed, but just buy that. Buy as taxonomy, then apply it to your organization. There are several things you can do that accelerate this work and actually build in your learnings much quicker than trying to have an enterprise-wide project all at once. It gets bogged down so quickly, and it's such a cultural change and other things in the company that it can die pretty quickly if you're not careful with it.
Great advice. Completely agree. Stuart, how about from your standpoint? You've done a lot of pioneering work. What would you say some of the biggest learnings?
I think sort of echoing that, I think, you make it too big, you end up sort of, wading through treacle. You make it too small, it doesn't make an impact. So it's sort of that sort of Goldilocks effects of choosing an area that really needs to make a difference. But the big thing for me is that you have to attach the HR solution to the business problem. If you just doing it because it's a cool thing to do for HR, it's not really going to go anywhere. So, the problems that we're really trying to solve are real. They're sort of, okay, then we're about to onboard 500 new accounting services people. How do we train them up? How do we get them up to speed? Could we do that before day one and get them trained up? So time to productivity is lower. Wait a minute, I can't even get 500 people. The market's been sort of consumed. What's the adjacency of the skills of those individuals that we can go after? So a lot of it has to be attached to a real business problem that this is looking to solve. At the same time, I'm I have one of those habits of trying to sort of explain to people the 7 or 8 or 10 chess moves you need to make to achieve a massive transformation like this, because it is 8 to 10 different individual moves that come together in the culmination of a real sort of integrated solution longer term. And the reality is sometimes that confuses people. So you want to make sure that those business connections are relative on each of those individual moves. That individual understands the benefit that they're getting for that sort of one, bishop move out, and effectively you then sort of sign other people up to different moves. And then individuals would see the real value over time. And I think that's, to me, the secret of driving transformation is to make it, real solution-oriented problem solving for every single area that you're going after. And then obviously, once people trust that you're making the right decisions, they'll sort of be much more engaged on driving to the future that we're trying to get to together.
Great. Yeah, I thank you very much. So in both cases, I could not agree more. I remember a very large insurance company I visited 4 or 5 years ago had a big project to build the enterprise-wide skills database for every job in the company. They spent 2.5 years doing it, built a big website, turned it on, nobody used it. 2 years later, it's dead. The whole project's gone. The head of the project quit. And I'm not sure they got any ROI of it whatsoever. So business-centric, pragmatic, go where the action is, and you are building a muscle here. Mark, what about from your standpoint? You're looking, I think in some ways you guys in the telecommunications industry are used to these big transformational things. What have you learned that you think you can share with everybody?
Yeah, I think the first one, we did a little bit of design thinking, and the first part talks about empathy. Some even describe it as love. The thing I would do again is make sure that the personas are understood in terms of market and function specific. To Stuart's point, really speak to an outcome. What was fascinating, what we didn't expect, is why would people go to this environment? It was about searching for opportunities in different areas. Then for me, there's like a new phrase that I like. It's been coined, this protein career phrase, which speaks to like the future workers' professional life will be managed, defined, and evaluated from their own subjective perspective. And things like self-fulfillment and psychological factors that are unique to individuals will be more a measure of success compared to just salary and promotion. So for us, it is saying, how do we make sure these are personal and purposeful engagements, and also allowing people to see that there isn't just a single linear type career path, that there are different other opportunities, but really making sure that what we offer is something that people recognize. And that's why investing the time in market and function specific personas. We even use them for our videos. We've got these, we call them heroes in the market to talk about it. That's a big differentiator in success. And then for me, start small, but go live. As soon as we went in, we started really understanding and learning so much more.
Great. I mean, it's really a good point. This idea of design thinking is very new in HR, but I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about. But creating a set of personas or roles that you focus on and understanding those needs and building a solution that fulfills the desires of each individual employee, actually, you're almost guaranteed to be successful if you do that, as opposed to a project that sort of looks good for HR that the employees are not sure what it's about. We have a few more minutes. Kathy, can you go really quick on one thing you've learned, and then I want to turn it back over to Kamal.
Yeah, I think one thing that I have learned is the concept of industry transformation. So really thinking big around the industry. Don't just try to solve your industry problem in your industry. The kind of Amazon example for healthcare, right? If you're just trying to figure out the nursing shortage within your healthcare industry, you're not going to get there. And also related to that is think long term, because Amazon, if you want to hire somebody as a nurse and they are a warehouse worker today, of course you can't hire them tomorrow. So you got to play the long game and use data for that too. Use your own data, but then also industry data. And that's the kind of insights we get from the Eightfold database is what is it happening industry wide and also what's happening within your company. So that kind of outside in and inside out look is really important too.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, listen, you guys, thank you all for participating on this. There's just so many things to learn here. I'm sure people are going to want to re-listen to this webcast again. Kamal, let me turn it back over to you. Thank you for bringing us all together.
Absolutely. And this was fascinating. Time flew by. I think one thing that Mark didn't share is once they had their design down, he moved so fast to solve both for employees and for hiring in multiple countries. Yeah, I think both our teams were sort of amazed that we would be able to pull that off. So really good session. So folks, thank you. And if you want to continue the discussion in person or remotely, join us at Cultivate May 10th and 11th. It's going to be in Napa or remotely. So join us there, but there's more. Josh has his conference, which again was impacted by COVID, but will be in USC actually, with an amazing all-star cast. So I think if you are not getting invited, you should figure out how to get invited to this one. And this thing will be very exciting.
I think everybody should go to both.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Stay in Napa, then move down to Santa Barbara for a week, and then go down to Irresistible. So lots coming your ways, right? A lot of people who are undergoing the transformation, lots to share. And then if you would like, download a copy of the white paper. Clearly, you will be getting more and more insights throughout the year. There's a very packed agenda. And we hope to work with all of you soon so that not just reflected in all the questions here, so many things to sort out and solve together. Thank you all very much and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.